Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to the channel. We're gonna get right into it today. We're not gonna waste any time. We've been banging out these plate tests, and that's exactly what we're gonna continue today. We're going into the 2G open root. That's your horizontal, 1/8, 60-10, 332, 70-18. Let's get going. Our plates are beveled at 37.5 degrees on each side, giving you a 75-degree included angle. Setting up properly is everything. A good consistent fit up will make or break your root pass. Inconsistencies in the root opening or land will definitely show up in the finished weld. And how well your plates are in line with each other will predict what the finished product looks like. A consistent root opening and land will help you control penetration and the size of the keyhole during the root pass. In the 2G position, the plate is horizontal and we're progressing from the bottom up. Once again, 2 3/4 inch tack works really well for this root opening. Just like with the vertical or the flat, those tacks will become part of your weld, so they need to be sound with no lack of fusion and good penetration. Now before we get welding, let's have a look at our weld progression. Your first weld is going to go right down the center of that joint, and we call that one your root pass. This weld is completed with a cellulose 60-10 and acts as one of the most important welds of the joint. The next weld is your fill, or sometimes called your hot pass. It's intended to burn out any slag or any impurities deposited from that root pass. Now, depending on what type of electrode you're using for this hot pass, it can even correct any lack of fusion deposited from that root pass. Depending on the size of the groove, you may have another layer of filling. This can be completed in any number of welds. For us, we're going to be doing this one in 2 passes. The important part is that we start from the bottom and we work our way up. Finally, it's time to cap. Once again, starting from the bottom and working our way up, we're going to complete this in 2 to 4 welds. Your first pass is going to act as your shelf, and then we're going to start stacking them one on top of each other until we get to the top. For the root pass, I'm running a 1/8 60-10 at about 85 amps on DC, of course. And I've got my arc force set to about 4 on that dial. And what that's going to do is it's going to help me when it's time for me to bury that rod inside that groove. It's less likely to stub out. My runoff tabs are there to be used. Here I'm welding over my tack, heating it up and softening that weld so that we're left with a nice tie-in. Once I get to that first keyhole, I'm dropping down and pausing for a second. I'm using a whip and pause technique to manage the keyhole, moving forward slightly, pausing to fill, and then moving again. For that root pass, as you move across horizontally, gravity plays a big role compared to the flat or the vertical position. You need to drive that rod into the joint and control the keyhole carefully by examining where that puddle is going. If the puddle is favoring the bottom, you need to point up a little more. Don't let that sag out on you. If it's favoring the top, you want to do the opposite. Keep steady rod pressure, watch your sidewalls tie in, and maintain a good stepping rhythm. I like to listen to that weld blasting and breaking down those walls. When restarting with 60-10, I like to thin out about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch of your weld. So when you tie in, the transition between both welds are hardly noticeable. Your tie-ins might take some time to master, but having a clean tie-in is critical for a flawless root. Now this rod's only going to last for so long. When it comes to your 60-10, as this thing gets smaller, it tends to lose a lot of moisture, and that's where it's more likely to behave erratically, pulling from one side to another, fingernailing. So if it gets too out of control, you're better off just stopping, grabbing a fresh rod, and starting that tie-in, as opposed to having a bad weld and having to grind that out anyways. Once that root is in, clean that surface, clean out any slag or any high spots, grind that down, use your wire brush or your wire wheel. We want to make sure that we have a nice flat surface. Now that previous weld is always going to predict what that next one looks like. So we want to set ourselves up properly for that fill and cap. So we want to have a nice even surface. Here we're looking at a good root pass. We've got consistent penetration all the way through. We got nice ripples. We don't have any great undercut or any underfill. We don't have any suck back on that. Now this example here, we can see right at the tie-in, there's some lack of fusion in there, and that's where the slag is going to trap. So when we're doing our restart, we're doing our tie-in, we really got to make sure that we pause for that little second and make sure that we're catching that tie-in. Now we switch over to 70-18 for the fill and cap. I'm using a 332 70-18 and I'm bumping it up to about 90 to 95 amps. Now your 7018 needs a little bit more attention in the 2G because of gravity. It'll want to pull down or sag if we travel too slow. Now when it comes to that first fill pass, I'm driving that rod right down the center, keeping a nice tight arc length, and I'm watching the toes of the weld, making sure that we're blending in to both those side walls. Knowing I'm going to have another layer of weld, I'm going to travel a little quicker to make sure I have enough room for my other two passes. Focus on building up evenly without leaving any undercut or lack of fusion. Don't let the bead pile up too much in the middle. Work the edges and trust the puddle to fill naturally. I'm making sure I'm not burning my beveled edges away. I want that weld to be almost flush with the groove without going over. Having a look at our finished fill pass, you can see that it came out flush almost to that plate. We didn't burn away the edges and we're not any wider than we need to be. When it comes time to cap, we're going to burn that edge away about a 1/16 of an inch on the bottom and the top. That's going to give us just enough so that we make sure we don't have any undercut or any underfill. On that cap, it's all about consistency. The first pass on that bottom is acting as a shelf for the rest of them. It doesn't matter if you're doing a groove weld on a plate or pipe, or if it's a fillet weld. The first pass of the cap sets the tone for the remaining passes. There's really nothing new here. We're keeping a nice tight arc length, making sure that our angles and our travel speed are all consistent, and we're watching that puddle and making sure that that's staying consistent the whole way. All right, after we've got two passes in, you can see here that we've got one little space left on the top, and we're gonna throw our third pass in. We're gonna keep that arc length nice and tight. We're gonna keep our travel speed nice and steady, watching the size of that puddle the whole time and making sure that we're not undercutting or underfilling. This one is notorious for digging into that plate when it's a little bit too hot, so watch your heat on this one. Now we're examining that finished product before we send it off for destructive testing. You can see that we did this one in 3 welds and that we stacked our beads from crown to crown the whole way. Now if you look at the top here, if you end up with a little bit of undercut like this on the top, it's not the end of the world. We can always come in and do one more weld. You want to let your plate cool off a little bit, grab a drink, come back and finish that weld. Now we're not teaching this to any standard or anything like that, but it's super common to have 2 root bends and 1 face bend, and that would get measured up to a certain criteria that's specific. Example, you're allowed 1/8 of an inch in any direction as a defect. Anything larger than that would be considered a fail. All right, everybody, that's a wrap. That was your 2G open root, 6010 root, 7018 fill and cap. Now the hard part with this one is that you don't have gravity in your favor working for you. It's actually working against you. So you really got to recognize that puddle and understand what it's doing so that you can react in time. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments and we'll catch you on the next one.